Good morning, day 273. The sun, it's bright today, so I may walk in the other direction so it's not blinding me. And so I can see you all. Wow, it is gorgeous, gorgeous here. Just a little bit of a chill in the air. The geese are honking as normal. They're loud in the morning. They got a lot to say to each other as they wake up. And anyway, we're going to talk about, I got a lot to say too. I'm going to try to keep it concise though, because I'm meeting a good friend for breakfast. So good to connect and fellowship. All right, day 273. Whoop, whoop. 1 Corinthians 5 and 6. Now, Paul talks specifically about specific sins in this particular church, and even talks about the church and some things that we're not going to talk about. We're going to pull out what's practical for us, because not all of us are involved in church leadership and this kind of thing. So we're going to pull out concepts and then talk about how we can apply it to us. Because when you read some of these things, it's like, say, what? You know, our tendency, because again, we're all tuned into what's in it for me, that we might gloss by some of these chapters because it's like, oh, he's talking about church stuff. I don't need, I don't need that. So, but there's some good stuff here that we really can pull out. And I was thinking about it as a code of ethics. That's really, the church had to come up with their kind of code of ethics, code of conduct. And then even more than that, they had to have each had to have a personal code of conduct. You know, our bodies are important. They deserve being taken care of. If you're a believer, it's also seen as the the temple where the Holy Spirit dwells. And so we really need to be careful how we conduct ourselves so that it can be a good home and that there's not a division. We believe one thing, but then we're acting in another way, and avoiding the traps of the cognitive dissonance that can cause an internal division and lack of integrity that brings shame and guilt and all those kinds of things, which just drive us further, usually away from our own personal code of conduct. And we really, as humans, kind of want to live well. We want to have good consequences in our lives, and fruit that's often referred to in the Bible in our lives. But it's not always, it's just not easy. We have these bodies that have desires and they want things that aren't always best for us in the long run. And how do we discern and handle ourselves in the moment? Well, having a personal code of conduct can go a long way. And I'm an entrepreneur in a couple of different worlds right now. I'm a realtor and I'm a coach. And the real estate business has been around for a while. This is a good analogy. And did you know that you can be a real estate agent without being a realtor? When you have the logo and the badge and the title of realtor, that means you've taken the extra step to agree to a code of ethics, a code of conduct. And we have our own governing. It not only helps us to have guidelines when we deal with customers and clients, but also how we deal with each other. We have to know, and we keep that all in-house. Like, we want to keep our disputes in-house as much as possible. That was one of the things that Paul says, like, y'all are not settling your own disputes within the church. You're going into secular courts and like suing each other and having these lawsuits. Like, what are you doing? Like, can't you, like, we need to be set apart and convince people that they should join us. And here we are going out into their world and playing by their rules. No, don't do that. And a lot of professional organizations have taken on that same model. it's not just the church. Like we need to, because we have different issues, things. We know our business better than anybody. And we know what it takes to work well together in cooperation and how to settle things, because we're a little bit different than other, now I'm going back to the world of real estate as an example. We operate a little bit differently than some others. And there's codes of ethics for being in the medical professions, all these professional designations that also come with it, continuing education. You've got to do a lot to stay in these organizations, but there's not necessarily a requirement. So, and right now in the coaching world, there's nothing. It's all voluntary. There are some organizations that we can voluntarily belong to, but that have codes of ethics. But beyond that, like, you gotta be careful and know your own values and your own systems and how you're going to conduct yourself with other people. Paul brings in the analogy that Jesus also brought in at times of yeast. People are vulnerable. Humans are vulnerable to being easily influenced, not only by themselves, but each other. We can feel like we're solid in something, and then a situation comes along and we're like, well, would it be so bad this time? Or I like that person and I know them to be a pretty good person, so maybe, and then we see them doing something wrong or, not in their best interest maybe. And we're like, so maybe that's not so bad. We start linking things like, I don't want to judge that person. I don't want to think bad about that person. So I'll just change how I think about the behavior or about some other things. And then before you know it, we get faced with a similar temptation, and now our thought process is already waffling a little bit. That is the sort of the underlying message of these 2 chapters, to be very careful with who you associate with and how, even internally, knowing that you have a compass, an internal code of conduct, a personal code of conduct that can guide you when you are in relationships with people and then maybe they veer off and you're like, uh-oh, red flag, I need to be careful. And it's not even although Paul is using words like, well, within our agreed creed here as believers, we can judge each other because we've got to look out for the health of not only the other individual believers, but also for the greater body of believers as well. So that is where, even if we're going out and dealing with other people, like, we don't judge them. This is tricky stuff. Like, we don't judge them in the sense that we think that we are responsible, because we're always responsible for treating people with respect. But we can make judgments because we understand how the human condition and how humans work. And if I don't say something to you about your behavior and we are in a close relationship, I've got to let you know that if you continue down this path, we might need to change the nature of our relationship. But if we ignore behavior for the sake of a relationship, then we put ourselves in a vulnerable position to falling into the same behavior. He actually uses the word slave here. And this is how you can know, like, how vulnerable we are. That's a strong word. If we fall into behaviors and our brain starts linking, oh, wow, she or he feels better when we do this or that, even though we know in the long run it's not a good a behavior that's going to produce good consequences or good fruit. But, it's so tempting. And then we start justifying and go, well, so-and-so is doing it, and maybe it's not that bad. And then before you know it, you're a slave to that behavior. And I know, like, I was a slave to my wine for a while. I'm still a slave in some ways to overeating and under exercising and taking good care of myself, because I let those doors open and not having a clear code of conduct and code of ethics within myself for what was acceptable. And then so I let in some behavior that brought about some real consequences that I've got to now deal with and work my way out of. So, and it does feel at times like I'm a slave to parts of my self and body. Like, do you really want that? Yeah, I really want it. And in the moment when my brain has already made 1,000 decisions that day, and it's like, I can't fight this right now, because that's what, when you're in that slave relationship with a behavior, that's what it can feel like. It's like, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot to dedicate to making some changes like this in your life once you've gotten yourself. And then if you're spending time with people that don't think it's a big deal, he says in these chapters, just because anything is permissible doesn't mean you should be doing it. Just because you've been given freedom doesn't mean you should just take that as a license to do whatever. Consequences will happen regardless. So be careful and respect how we relate to each other as people and how vulnerable we are, especially when we're fond of other people and we have a close relationship and they start changing their behavior, which is why we were given the warnings in the previous chapters that we're also supposed to be cognizant of the impact we have on other people and not be stumbling blocks. So he's saying the same thing. He's just stepping on the other side of that argument, if you will, or that case, and saying you've got to look at it now from this side. It makes sense from all sides. Whether you're on the side of being the stronger believer and you've got to be careful of not making others stumble, you are also a human and you can easily stumble if you are in a body of believers where you all don't have a strong code of ethics and you're letting things happen in your midst that will infiltrate and spread like yeast does through bread. And this is how vulnerable we are to each other. And it's okay to make judgments from that standpoint. Like, this is not good for us individually or collectively. And then you maybe take that person out of the equation, or the church body in this example, and then at that point they have a choice. They can either get on board with the code of ethics and the code of conduct and get themselves right, or they can be left to their own consequences. So we're still giving people free will and a choice to do what they want, but if they choose to stay in sin, then they will have to have the consequences. But we don't have to keep the consequences in the body, literally, and then let it infect everybody else. Hopefully that makes sense. It got me really thinking personally that it's probably time to revisit a few things for myself and make sure that I have a good understanding of what my personal code of ethics are. And if I have people in my life that aren't necessarily supporting and that could be a threat to that. And not that I'm going to go, ooh, you're bad, you're wrong, like make personal judgments. They can do what they want. I'm going to leave that between them and God. But because I have my responsibility to God as a believer, I am responsible for making sure that I am editing through ethics what I'm exposed to, so that I don't give myself intentionally roadblocks or things to fight that aren't necessary. Hopefully that makes sense. And I know a lot of people are in professions that have similar, codes of conduct. So I hope that that was a good analogy to help us understand from a practical application what Paul is talking to specifically about the Church of Corinth here. And again, that was in 1 Corinthians chapters 5 and 6. All right, go have a great day. Rise and shine. Bye.